In 1964, a woman named Kitty was heading back to her apartment in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Manhattan. But as she was walking to her building, a man with a knife viciously attacked her by stabbing her several times as she screamed for help. One neighbor yelled out his window for the man to, quote-unquote, leave that girl alone, but the man continued stabbing her. She kept screaming until finally someone called the police. The police arrived in 2 minutes, but Kitty was already dead and her attacker had disappeared. The attack had lasted 35 minutes. During the police investigation, it was found that 38 people in the surrounding apartments had witnessed the attack, but only one called the police. If someone had acted sooner to help Kitty, she probably would have survived. Kitty's tragedy sparked the interest of psychologists, specifically John Darley and Bibb Latané, who set out to try to understand what psychological forces may have been what stopped people from helping. Darley and Latané theorized that a larger number of people who witness an emergency means less people who actually step in and help because they assume that someone else will take care of it. This is a phenomenon they called diffusion of responsibility. Darley and Latané decided to set up an experiment in order to systematically examine and analyze how people react differently to emergencies depending on how many people are nearby. So they headed to NYU and asked some students to take part in an experiment they were doing. For the experiment, each student was set up in a room and was told the number of people they would be speaking to through the intercom. Those in group 1 would be talking to one other person, those in group 2 would be talking to 2 other people, and those in group 3 would be talking to a group of 5 people. But little did they know that they weren't actually talking to real people through the intercom, they were talking to pre-recorded tapes. And in fact, on one of these tapes was the voice of one of the previous speakers distressfully saying, as best as they could, that they were having a seizure and needed help. The whole point of this was to see who was going to help. The results highly supported Darley and Latané's theory. When there was more people, less people decided to help because the majority assumed the others would have it under control. They also found out that with the few people who decided to help, getting help took longer than it could have because there was still a group of people, just smaller. So, with this, there were several different terms Darley and Latané found to be present. First of all, their team, known as diffusion of responsibility, was present, which is when people decide not to help because they assume the other people nearby will do so. But also, Darley and Latané found out that a term known as evaluation apprehension was also present. This means that one of the reasons why we fail to help when others are present is because we're afraid of being embarrassed or ridiculed if we ended up being wrong about our decision to help. Taking the knowledge from the experiment, Darley and Latané wrote a book about what they figured out, titled The Unresponsive Bystander, Why Doesn't He Help? In their book, clear by the title, they talk about why exactly people choose not to help when it's clear someone is distressed or an emergency is present, and they also provide the steps as to what bystanders should do if they see something that could be a potential emergency. First, you must notice the event. You're a bystander, so the very first thing that would happen is you seeing what's going on. Second, you must interpret the situation and try to figure out what looks like it may be taking place. Third, you have to assume responsibility. You must assume that no one else will help. Fourth, you have to decide what to do. And fifth, you have to follow through and do it. But with all this being said, the most important thing you should ask yourself is, what would you do if you were the only one there?